it's kind of the whole package. Like I said, a lot of the CEOs know how to speak. They've gone to school, business school, and they do really well at that. But it's the finer things that they're not familiar with.
Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.
Let's do this. Welcome, everybody, to the Jerry Brazy podcast. Very excited to have a guest today. Steve, Steve, how you say your last name? Kosch? I should have asked you.
It's Kosch, like kosher pickle, but without the pickle, just Kosch.
Steve Kosch. He's a former anchor with CNN and ABC who has taken his world-class media presentation skills and now coaches CEOs, politicians, authors, and speakers to look around and sound their best while on stage, on camera, or in the media. This helps them to grow their brand and to expand their influence. And for me, this is a neat one to have. This is a neat guest to have on because we were going to try to have a video up. Lots of people have seen it. It was fairly popular of me melting down in front of a camera, trying to do a simple 30-second video. So for us, this will be a treat from that perspective because I've taken a lot of crap about that video good-naturedly. And we laugh about it all of the time. You'll be able to see technical difficulties made it so that we couldn't get it working, but you'll be able to watch it probably when we're done. But Steve, welcome. Appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it very much, Jerry. And you're a good sport to make fun of yourself, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of people are, just afraid of what they see and they don't want to share it. But, you're a very transparent kind of guy, having watched your podcast many times. So good for you.
Yeah, I don't care too much. If you can't laugh at yourself, what use is it, right? Particularly
right,
because I love giving people as much trouble as they love giving me. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Give us, I gave you the little bio there. Tell us about what you're doing and about yourself.
Well, how I got into this, Jerry, I was one of those kids that just loved the weather. When I was 14, 15 years old, I observed the weather at my house, had the weather station and all that, and took readings in the morning and afternoon. And then I would watch the TV weather guys on TV in Los Angeles here where I was growing up. And about 6 months later, when I was 15 years old, my parents had a vacation home in Oceanside, California, and a brand new Cablevision television station, complete with news anchors and lights and cameras and everything else, was coming about. And of course, they were looking for student volunteers to keep money under control. So I volunteered and really got a lot of experience. Every time there was a school break, I was there actually going on camera, giving the weather report, the fishing report, and anything else. So I kind of got into it at a real early age, but it was because of my love for weather. And that kind of helped me to move to a bigger location like Los Angeles, and then went to Atlanta to help start the Weather Channel, and then up to ABC in New York, and then back to Atlanta with CNN, where I spent a good 10 years there before starting my own business here in Newport Beach, California.
And so your foray into this had more to do with your love of the sun and the wind and the rain more than it did the getting out in front of the camera.
It did. Well, it started with the love of weather. And then I saw the people on television talking about it. And I said, I want to be like one of those guys. And so opportunity a few months later, and I'm still a young 15-year-old kid, but I was given the chance to talk about what I love talking about. And so that's where it started for me.
So that is, what year would that have been?
1970.
1970. So that's the kind of before cable television really took off. So when you say you went to work for CNN, you're talking about the very early days before it is certainly what it became and what it is today.
Correct. When I was 15 years old, cable was just beginning.
Yeah.
And this was with Cablevision back in the day. And then I'm trying to remember, I went to CNN in 1985. So yes, it was in the early days there. But even prior to that, I helped start the Weather Channel, and that was in 1982 in Atlanta. Both of them are in Atlanta, and a lot of people thought it was owned by the Ted Turner. Only CNN was owned and operated by Ted Turner.
Did you have any concept, kind of an aside question, Do you have any concept way back then that, I mean, as you say, the Weather Channel, I think right here on my phone, I have the Weather Channel app that I check on a daily basis.
Sure.
And this is 2019. Was there any concept that this thing might become what it became, or was it just like a startup and, every day was something new and it brought something different?
Well, it was like a startup, and a lot of people, because at the time I was working at ABC in Los Angeles, and that's a pretty good gig. It's the
Yeah.
number two TV market in the country, and I'm, in my 20s, and a lot of people saying, "Why are you going to take a risk, go all the way across the country for the startup in 1982 at the Weather Channel?" And I said, "You know what? I think it's going to work. I don't know why, but John Coleman, who's the gentleman that started this, and he was the Good Morning America weather guy at the time. And I loved him, loved his presentation, and he was hiring 50 different meteorologists from all over the country. And I was the West Coast representative for them. And I thought, if this guy's putting so much money in himself, and weather's always been around for a long time, I think it's going to go somewhere. But still, yeah, the first couple of years was very hit or miss. And even behind the scenes, as I read some of the history there, when I was there, I had no idea that we were this close to being fired and let go because they were strapped for money. No doubt
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
Like any other startup. I remember I'm 50, so I was born in 69, and I don't remember that starting up, but I remember Fox starting up. I remember that very well, and kind of the same growing pains and the same things I remember reading about in the magazines at that time. About how
Yeah.
difficult it could be to come in against those incumbents and
It
make
was,
headway.
CNN was the same exact way. We had to be very scrappy to try to make it
Yeah.
against the big guys. All the big networks, they were looking at us and even calling us Chicken Noodle Network or CNN.
Is that right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was a big industry talk, and they're not going to go anywhere, do anything. But we were scrappy. We got innovative. We didn't have the budgets. I think at the time ABC was spending $300,000 a year to have their 6 o'clock news. That's it. So they're spending a lot of money, and here we're trying to do 24 hours every day for
Yeah.
a budget that's a lot less. So we had to be scrappy. I remember back in the early days of CNN, if there was a tornado in Toledo, for instance, and we didn't have the satellite trucks and all that, but we would get a reporter there, or we would get on the phone and call a resident there and say, "Hey, tell me about that tornado that just happened." And then, the person on the ground is actually telling us what happened. And so, it was innovative and scrappy, and it obviously worked and kind of took off.
It teaches you to be quick on your feet when you're in that environment, doesn't it?
Yeah. Things are moving very quickly, and an eyewitness is an eyewitness, whether it's a camera or just a person talking about what happened. So I thought it was very innovative how CNN cut corners, so to speak, because they had to.
Right. And still make it look good. Still palatable.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, so I'm fascinated by a couple of these subjects. One in particular. So we do this podcast. I'll just kind of give you my quick background on this podcast. So we do this podcast and we do some videos online and things of that nature, and Twitter and Instagram, like everybody else. For me, I can sit here and have this conversation with you. I have a camera right here in front of me. There's another one over here, and there's one over here. I can sit here and have this conversation with you, no problem whatsoever, right? I don't even think about the camera other than that's where I know where I'm
Right.
supposed to look.
Mhm.
Take you away and just have me talk to the camera. I speak to people. I consult. I do nothing but, I just talk all of the time. But the second it is just me and that camera, the whole thing goes to hell. And I intellectually can't understand why it is so difficult for me to talk to a camera by myself. And so, as reading through kind of the stuff that you've helped with, I thought, this resonates with me in that I can't do that. And I think a lot of people have that same problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm just the opposite of you, because when I was at CNN for so long, I'm in a studio and there's, a few camera people and floor directors moving around behind me, but probably no more than 5 to 10 people or in the studio at one time. And I get my report. I'm ad-libbing. I always said I had the most difficult job in the newsroom because I didn't have a teleprompter like the sports person or the news person did. Everything is ad-lib. And they gave me 2 minutes to talk about the weather on a national scale, which usually ended up being less than 2 minutes. So
Yeah.
I had to ad lib. I got cues in my ear, wrap it up, throw it over here, do this, do that. So I had to, everything was all ad lib. But for me, it was very easy with just 8 or 10 people in the studio. And I know they're busy doing their own thing. But when I get in front of a crowd for the first time, to hear these people, breathing and coughing and actually looking at me, that's where I kind of froze up a little bit. But of course, I warmed up and got it. But it's a mindset thing. It's just, are we confident? Do we have our message down? And once you've got that down, then everything else should be a piece of cake. Like you said, we're having this one-on-one. And if you didn't see me, you could put just make an avatar. Who is the people that listen to your podcast, Jerry? And then just think of them and then talk to them. And once you get in that mindset, then everything will work fine. So it's,
there's a certain amount of self-consciousness, I suppose, that comes with it that kind of tangles the tongue and stalls the mind a little bit.
Right.
That in no other part of my life have I experienced except when there's a camera rolling and I'm the only one on the other end of it.
Yeah. No, it's good if you know your message, and everything else will come along very easily.
So you're 15 years old and you
Mhm.
go out and you get this job. I gotta imagine, even back then in the 70s, the competition for these jobs is pretty fierce. What sets you apart? What makes you different in what? And then again, I'm sure as time went on and we got into the 80s and cable television proliferated, that those jobs became even more competitive. What set you apart that you were able to have success in those in that environment?
Well, when I was 15 years old, I was free. I was free labor. So, there was no competition for that. But when I did get my first paying job, it was just a matter of how I presented. Did I have what I call the executive presence? Did I have the looks? Did I look like I talked or knew about what I was talking about? And that just came with lots and lots of practice. And I got to tell you, talking about, getting over our stage fright that we have, I got in front of a big wardrobe mirror and practiced before I went on camera. Now, this is back in the early days, but I rehearsed. I looked at myself in the mirror. I'm looking at my facial expressions, my gestures, everything that goes along with that. And then I decided that, I got rid of things that were not good, that were distracting, and just put a smile on my face and talked about the weather. Now, when there was a tornado in Toledo, I didn't smile. I wasn't happy about it, but I gave the information. But generally, when you're, talking about weather in Southern California, it's the same each and every day. So it's how you're creative to tell the same story in a different way every day.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's not so much delivering the weather when the weather is the same every day. It is your personality as much. Probably anybody can read a teleprompter, or anybody can come up with what the weather's going to be in Southern California, I'd assume. Really, what sets you apart is a personality then.
Yeah. I was in Bakersfield, California, for instance. And as an example, I should say, it was summertime. There it's 110 degrees all the time. So one day I did the weather report in the Celsius scale. Another day I fried an egg on the sidewalk. It's those little things that people will remember. Maybe they say it's a little corny, but it sets me aside from somebody else. And I've got that personality. I like to talk about it. But if you saw me in person, I'm not really a super personable guy. But when I'm on stage, I'm on stage.
Yeah.
And I know I have to perform. And that's what I do.
The exact opposite of me.
Mhm.
Put me in front of a camera and I fold up and away from the camera. I'm as bigger than life, I suppose. What in terms of, again, I go back to the 70s because you were on the forefront of that, and here we are sitting here talking in a podcast. You're wherever you are, I'm in my office here, and I love this technology and where technology has gone, and I want to get your take on that. But also, I always say I'm the luckiest guy in the world, and we all are from the technology perspective because I get to talk to so many different people. You just happen to be in California. We were on with people in London twice in the last couple of weeks. Somebody coming up in Spain, and I just get to have all of these great conversations with all of these different people about all sorts of different things. As somebody that was in the media, you ever step back and just kind of reflect at where you started to, here you and I are sitting. I'm assuming you're in some studio at your house or something, and we're just having these conversations, not unlike what you did, in the 70s talking to a camera, only much more intimate.
Yeah. This is my office in Newport Beach, California, and it's just nice little office. And this is where we bring clients in and we put them on camera and show them what they're doing. But you talk about the early days of television where it was a massive effort with these massive cameras, and today we've got a camera right on our smartphone. So
Yeah.
that's pretty amazing the way things have come. But you're right. When I was at CNN, we were talking to news people and high level news people, newsmakers all over the country, all over the world. And that's exciting to be a part of it, kind of behind the scenes and watch as this unfolds, as the Gulf War unfolded and what the generals and the commanders are saying on camera and even off camera when we're in a commercial break. So
Mhm.
the world definitely is opening up, but also too, it is making it more of a level playing field as far as people such as ourselves, normal people like us. We get to do what the big guys are doing on a different scale now. You have your own network, your
Yeah.
own podcast, and like you said, you get to talk to these people, newsmakers, in their own right or in their own industry, and learn more about what's going on. So that's the benefit of this information driven internet that we have today.
Yeah, who would have thought that they talk about Joe Rogan and his podcast as kind of America's newsman now? These long form conversations, 2-3 hours long, and 6 or 8 or 10 million people over the course of one of those will watch, or for each one of those, compared to 2 or 3 or 4 million people that watch it on network television. And I just thought, what a disruptor that is. That
Mhm.
rather than getting the news in 5 minutes or 15 minutes, you can get very specific subjects over the course of 2 or 3 hours, and twice as many millions of people will watch it as network TV. Who would have thought?
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. It is amazing. It is the playing field has been leveled.
Let me ask you. So, I told you about my issues with the camera. Communication wise, what is your advice for somebody? Let me back up a second. So, I own businesses, some rather large businesses. And one of the things that I come across the most, that if I could snap my fingers and fix for many people, is their ability to communicate. Now, we can all communicate at a basic level, right? Hi, bye, how are you? All of the basics. It's when we start to get out of kind of that comfort zone of what would be just regular conversation, and now we're trying to have a let's say a debate or a heated conversation, or something that's a personal, and that's where I see that conversationally people start to fall apart, and so then they turtle, if you will, back inside themselves, and it makes it hard for them to go have these conversations with other people because they're so self-conscious about it, I suppose. What tricks are there, if any, for people to learn to communicate? And I don't know if your expertise goes to one-on-one or communicate with a crowd. I'm really just talking about you meet somebody on the street and you're having a conversation waiting for a bus. What's the trick?
Most of our conversation is casual conversation, like you said. How's the weather? Great. How's the kids? Good. When we go a little bit deeper, that's where we have to think more, and maybe we haven't clearly thought about that particular subject, whatever you're dealing with. So um, that's when I coach executives and CEOs. They know their material. They know their audience that they're going to be going to. If they don't, then I help to educate them or ask them or teach them how to do research on who they're going to be talking to. But if it's an area of their expertise, They need to know everything there is about that. And then once they have that material down, then it's a matter of what I call executive presence. That's what I teach them and how I teach them to look and sound their best to be that executive leader that they're wanting to be. Now, if it's uh, a sports celebrity or something, they're not necessarily known for dressing in nice suits unless they're on NFL, the football pre games and halftime reports. But generally, they're in their athletic wear. But they look the part. They're an athlete, so they would give their information there. But if, for instance, if it was a CEO of a bank or a financial firm, they want to dress the part. They need to look that part, and then they need to act that part by being knowledgeable, being engaging with whoever is asking them questions, or if they're up front giving a speech, they have to know the material and they need to know the little things that I call executive presence. What makes them likable? What sets them apart? Like you asked me earlier, what sets them apart from the other CEO? Or why should I buy that product compared to this product or service? So it's kind of the whole package. Like I said, a lot of the CEOs know how to speak. They've gone to school, business school, and they do really well at that. But it's the finer things that they're not familiar with. Uh, is their message congruent with what they're showing? If they're talking about a subject, for instance, our company is very transparent with our employees and our staff and all of that. But in the meantime, they're folding their arms and they're looking disinterested or disingenuine. Those are the things that can really make the difference. And when the viewer sees that incongruency, more than likely they're going to go with the nonverbal clues that they get. The defensive arms, the eyes, and just looking shady and things like that over the actual message, which may be true, but it's just not being delivered correctly. So those are the finer things that I work with. I call executive presence.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that about crossing your arms because as a younger guy, I did never even think about that. And as I've gotten older and I watch people and then I do it myself, I'll catch myself with my arms folded and it really feels like a guarded position or like I'm not interested in anything. Almost like I built a bridge around or a fence around myself by crossing my arms. And so I make a point to have my arms open now when I catch myself and they're crossed because people react to you differently when your arms are crossed. It came across to me best. I was sitting across my desk from an employee and I sat back and crossed my arms and she stopped talking. Like, she read that verbal or that physical cue as me doing something other than just sitting back, relaxing, and listening to what she had to say. So yeah. I think I agree wholeheartedly with that and never thought that much about specifically, I guess, how you carry yourself. How much of that can you deliver a great message and not have all of those physical kind of attributes and cues?
I guess you can, but you will come off as bored, stiff, and people will be disinterested in you because they read it as he's a little too stiff. Something's wrong. He's guarded because he's not relaxing and doing the gestures and smiling and things like that. He's guarded. Now, I will tell you too, not all of those gestures, like the arms folded kind of thing, necessarily mean that person is closed off or defensive along those lines. It could be that they need, they give themselves the self hug. They need to be comforted themselves a little bit. I was at a speech last week, actually, with the FBI special agent was there, and he was talking about body language and all that. He said, don't read too much into that because that's just one part of the clue. That's something that they look at, but then they're also listening very carefully to what is being said to see if that could mean something. Maybe he's just cold, he's got his arms closed like this because he's cold. That could be that. So don't read too much into that, but it's when all of these little elements come together that the CEO, executive, business owner will shine compared to someone else.
And that's interesting as a layman. I didn't think I think this is the first time that I've ever consciously thought about this, that when you hear a great speech, the you are as taken by the physical actions as you are what you heard. Meaning, if there were no physical actions, you're not receiving that nearly as well as you would if you're seeing it with the physical actions and whatever they're saying, whatever the verbiage is. So
Yeah.
I had never thought about those two things go together. Great speech is more than just what you're saying.
It is, and I would say if you had to err on, the verbal aspect of it compared to the nonverbal, nonverbal has a lot higher ranking with how people perceive that speech than
Wow.
they do words. They're looking at the body language, the facial expressions, and then the gestures. So it's important. I remember listening to Zig Ziglar one time, the sales motivational expert
Sure.
back in the day when I was learning sales, and he would say that he would go to a certain part of the stage all the time to make an important point. And so the audience didn't necessarily know that, but they just felt a little more comfortable when he's making these points on this particular point in the stage. So there's a lot of psychology behind putting together a great presentation. And it's slightly different also for radio as it is for television, as it is in standing on a stage. There are a lot of commonalities, but there are some differences that are important to know if you go in those different areas.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. So your media training, I guess I should say, Steve is the owner of the Media Training Network. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that is correct.
And that
Yes.
is the business that he started coming out of his career on network television. So you kind of covered some of it, but brag on that a little bit. Tell us exactly what you do there.
Well, it was in 1993 that I was in Atlanta, but I was a Southern California guy, and my wife was from this area as well. And we had 4 children at that point. And I said, you know what? I'm been doing this since I'm 15 years old. I'm now in my 30s. Let me try something different. So I liked like Ron Howard, a child star, so to speak, and then he went behind the scenes, became the director. So that's what I envisioned doing. I wanted to make movies, and I started actually I left CNN to start the video editor, which I still have, which is a video production business here in Newport Beach, and just telling stories with video. And I like being behind the scenes and occasionally still in front. And when clients would find out that I used to be on network television, they'd say, "I've got a big speech coming up. Can you give me some tips?" So I started coaching them. And that's how Media Training Network came about. So it was really full circle for me, having started in the business at a young age and now helping other people. And as a matter of fact, Jerry, that's one of my big goals by the year 2025, to touch with the message and skills uh, college students how to communicate effectively. I hope to touch 100,000 kids with my message and my training in that period of time. So if you know any colleges, let them know I'm open to come speak and teach.
And that is specifically about. I have about college kids. I have a 20-year-old daughter, 22-year-old son, a 20-year-old daughter, and an 18-year-old son. And my daughter in particular, since they were young, I always explain to them to not use the word like. Like, as you know, is way overused, and
Yes.
and particularly in teenage circles, it's almost a default. And it's like every third word is them using that word like. And so I had taught my kids for until they were old enough to really grasp it. And now today they'll be like, "Dad, did you hear how many times that person said like?" And I said, "Yeah, I know." Is that I always wondered what that is and why people do that. And I'm assuming that there's other words or other things that we do. I assume it's some sort of nervous, get our thoughts together, stall, while we're thinking about what we want to say next,
Yeah.
along those lines. What do you think about that?
I think that's probably true. I think it's also culture. Back in the day in the 60s, everything for me was bitching and far out and boss and all that. So it's just a new generation of terms that are used. Another one that I hear a lot is, "I know, right?"
Yeah,
You've heard that before. Yeah,
right.
yeah. And again, A lot of people think being a presentation trainer, I got to be on my toes. This guy's going to tear me apart. That's not the case at all because we just want you to be more aware and more effective when you're on camera or on stage. And so we call these things out. There's nothing wrong with saying like or so. We do it all the time.
Yeah.
But it's the overuse. You're right, the overuse. And if you're in a presentation, if you're applying for a job and you're using the word like a lot or so, and you're doing those kind of things, it just, it doesn't look good, especially
Yeah.
if your manager that's interviewing you is 20, 30 years older.
Right.
And the position is customer facing. So that's important to come across your, I guess, a little more professional for a teenager or a young person, come off a little more professional because now they have to step up their game a bit and
Yeah,
they have to present.
I think it's a self-assurance broadcast also. I think, I remember as a kid and you're sitting across from a sale, and if every fourth word is like because you're nervous, which it tends to, whatever your bad habit is really comes to the forefront from a communication perspective when you're nervous. And so I can remember sitting across making a sale, and then on the flip side, having somebody come back to me and trying to make a sale to me, and using kind of those, I don't know what you'd call those, kind of placeholder words or
Filler words.
Yeah,
yes.
filler words. And
Yeah.
it seems like there's a lack of what's the word I'm looking, where you're sure of yourself, a lack of being sure enough of yourself and what you're talking about, that you don't know it well enough. You didn't take enough time to prepare for this meeting, whatever the reason might be. And I think without a doubt, it, at least in my experience, really costs people either in the career or in making the sale, whatever it might be. And really driven mostly by nerves. So at least for me, it was nerves. How do you control that? What's your tips for getting your nerves under control?
Well, number one, once we identify that as an issue, and that's one of the first things that we do, we get the client in here on camera, and then we'll play that segment back. I'll just ask some casual questions. Tell me about yourself. Where are you from? That sort of thing. And then we watch it back. And then generally, the first time they see themselves on television, or on the TV, the monitor, they're shocked of how they look, or they'll make comments. I didn't know I sounded that way.
Yeah.
Different little things like that. So once they become aware of how they look on camera, then they're a little more open to getting corrections and things like that. So I think it's just awareness of word usage, being aware of that, and then how they look and present themselves. And on continuing on that same theme, if you're trying to promote yourself as someone who is a professional, for instance, I remember being at a speech and it was a female doctor, psychology or something along those lines, and had all the credentials, written several books. And yet she would use language that was fixin' and I'm gonna do this. And it so degraded her message. It made me think, is she really a doctor? Is she really this educated and she doesn't speak correctly? So that was the incongruency that I got from that message right away. And then I'm sure once she was aware of that, she wasn't my client, but once she became aware of that, I'm sure a lot of things changed.
Right. That's interesting. And I know I hate listening to myself or watching myself on video. I in particular listening to myself. So I have to listen back to these podcasts, just to approve them and make sure that that it went and there's nothing in there I don't want or things of that nature. But I hate it. What's your take on why do we hate listening to ourselves? And I'll add to that, I tell people this all the time, that I hate listening to myself, and they'll go, "Oh God, I hate listening to myself too." Your voice sounds to you so different than when, like right now when I'm speaking, but if I go back and listen to this, my voice sounds way different than I hear it, and yet mostly people are always telling me, "Oh no, it's a great voice, you sound good." Any sense behind why that happens and why we generally all think that way?
Well, if we didn't have headphones on and ear pieces and things like that, we hear ourselves from a different direction, a different angle. So our voice, and then we pick it up through our ears either this way or sometimes internally as well. So when we're recorded, like on a video camera, and we see that and we hear it played back, it sounds different. Same thing with video. You see yourself occasionally, maybe in the morning at the mirror, and that's about it. But
Yeah.
if you're trying to prepare a speech and go in front of a big group, you're much more aware and cognizant of how you look or how you should look and sound and hold yourself. So it's just awareness. You're not aware yet of how you should look and sound.
So on that, from that, then being aware, I'm sure, is a big part of improving communication skills. And one of the things that you're doing is to help people communicate or with their communication skills, but not just in front of a crowd or delivering a speech, right? Also in one-on-one
Right.
communication. What are a
Right.
couple of what are some thoughts on what people can? I guess what are some thoughts that people do that they shouldn't, if you can, and then what can you do to improve that?
Okay. Um, I think basically people become overconfident. Sometimes they know their message points, or they know what they want to talk about, or they don't know what they want to talk about. So that could, trip them up either way. For people that think they know too much, they like to tell others how much they know about something, and
Yeah.
then the message becomes diluted. You may be talking to the wrong audience, and you're giving them way too much information. That happens with the media quite a bit, where people will be extremely helpful. Let me give you this information. You have the background on this. And then all of a sudden, the reporter becomes overwhelmed with the facts. And then when the story comes out, there's obviously incongruency with what should have been said. You're misquoted. So, be aware of your audience, but also be crystal clear on your message. And in general, most of us will talk in paragraphs as opposed to sentences. When I was on television, it was kind of an unspoken rule, three rules: keep it short, get to the point, and always ask what's in it for the listener or the viewer.
Yeah.
And if you keep those three in mind, you're going to be short, to the point. You're going to get your message across very quickly. And you're going to make sure that your audience picks up the message that's interesting to them. So I think just being aware of all those will help you in that regard.
Yeah.
For going on radio, it's different than going on television. Um, when if it was a traditional podcast that doesn't have the video component to it, it's audio, just like radio is. And our senses are, we just have the ears to listen to that message. So we use our voice a lot more differently than we would on television. We have to enunciate better. Our vocal variety needs to be there. We need to be excited, but then we also need to bring it down during a serious discussion. So
Yeah.
those things we talk about. When you have the two senses, if you're on television or in this live podcast with video, we've got the eye and we've got the ears. So we can pick up a little more information than we could with just an audio feed.
What would your tip be for someone meets somebody on the street, meets them let's use
Okay.
something a little more realistic. You're at an event, you're at a conference, you got the after conference coffee hour out in the hallway. What to someone who is not comfortable having those kind of meet and greet one-on-one conversations? What's the trick? Is there a trick from your perspective on how to initiate and then be able to hold that conversation?
Sure. People love to hear themselves talk. They love to be the center of attention. So a trick that reporters would use, and I still use today, is let the other person talk. They love to talk. They feel that their message is being heard, and just ask occasional questions about that. And more than likely, 75% of that conversation is going to be about that other person, and maybe just 25% or less with you asking questions to further clarify something. So that's one trick to disarm people. But if you are an executive and you need feedback, you need it both ways. Is don't dominate the stage. Give some give and take. Learn
Yeah.
from the other person. And when you're on television like this or a video podcast, I'm leaning slightly into the microphone and leaning towards you. I'm making gestures towards you just so you feel comfortable. And I'm giving my opinion, my information to you. And it's much more engaging than if I just sat back here like this and stiff as a board. So
Sure.
you can tell the difference, obviously, right
Sure.
away.
Yeah.
So,
It's been my experience too that people, you said at the start there that people like to hear themselves talk, and one of the biggest detractors I think that I've seen from people finding success when it comes to communicating is that they can't wait for somebody to finish talking because they know what the
yeah,
answer should be,
yeah, yeah,
and they'll and I think it's impossible to hear what someone is saying when you're thinking about what your response is going to be 1 second after you just shut up. And getting out of your own way, I always say you got to get out of your own way, concentrate on what someone's saying, hold your brain. I mean, I think pretty quick on my feet, so I'm as guilty of this as anybody. And when I was young, I was terrible. I don't know how anybody put up with me because literally I would interrupt you and say, "Yeah, this is what you're about to say, and here's my response to that." So I guess I'm critical of myself about doing that, but really it's detrimental because you're not really learning anything from what the other person's saying. You're almost offending the other person, and you're just reiterating what you already know rather than learning from what they have to tell you. And then they just turn around and walk away and never talk to you again. And that's not a basis of having a good conversation without a doubt. But for me, that's probably the number one problem I see with people is not letting they're so in such a hurry to show people how smart they are and what they know that they don't let them talk.
yeah, you are absolutely right. And that's one of the finer points of executive presence is to be active listeners, listening to what that person is saying. And then once they're finished, give it a second. That's all we need is 1 second. And then the person will say, well, he heard me.
Sure.
And then you respond or you ask the next question. But you're right to shut it off right away. You could just tell they're not listening to you. They're not
No.
listening. They're just waiting for you to shut your mouth so they can go.
And
So yeah,
and right along with that is that body language you're talking about. They look like they're ready to run a race. Like they're ready to just take off.
Yeah.
Just like that. That's exactly right. Yeah. That's it's interesting, and I think that's at least in my experience, again, has been a fallback position. Somehow that's in our DNA. We have to untrain ourselves to not do that because the majority of people I've met who don't have any training speaking wise, that is usually the fallback. And maybe it has to do with some self-esteem issues, and maybe we're trying to overcompensate, particularly if we're talking with somebody that knows more than we do, or there's all of these different factors that go into communication with other people that I think preclude you from doing it successfully, and you may not even be aware of it. It's one thing, I suppose, to talk to Steve and have him tell you, stand up straight, do this, do that. And then there's that, like you said, the smaller things, the mental things that impact how you communicate, but then also how what you're doing is received from the other side, either vocally or, and in many cases, much more importantly, physically, how you're moving and the way you stand, the way you hold yourself.
Yeah. And I'll give you a good example of this. A client of mine in the financial services industry, he was recruited by CNBC to come on and be an expert guest to talk about financial products and services. So he was an expert guest on this program for 4 minutes. Then that went away, and then another 4 minutes came up at a few months later. We did the math on this. We figured he got about $1.8 million worth of commercial airtime for just being an expert guest to actually give his information that the audience wants to hear about. He wasn't pushing his firm, although his firm and his name were right there all the time. He got that free publicity. So he was there to be an expert guest, to give his opinion in the best way he possibly could. And we did quite a bit of preparation for that. So when he went on camera, he looked like that consummate professional. And now he has a standing offer to come in anytime he's in New York to be on the program again. So that's the good thing that can happen from a media exposure.
In that environment, the pressure's on too, right? Because if it goes reasonable or it goes well, that's good. If it does not go well, there's a chance you're not coming back. So the pressure's on, I'm assuming.
Right. And your firm is represented and your name is there, and but that's why he prepared for it. And any kind of high stakes environment, it's always best to get some training. It's like, why did Michael Jordan need a coach? Well, it's the little finer points. If he can make an extra point every game, that'll make the difference perhaps in the playoffs. So
Right.
it's just being aware of what your limitations are, and somebody looks at you a little bit differently. And that's the thing with media trainers such as myself. We're not there to change you. You've got your own personality. We want that to come across. It's just we want you to polish that message just a bit so you can be more effective, reach more people, sell more things.
So the Media Training Network, who is your ideal client? So anybody listening and they hear our conversation, got a sense of what you do, who is your client? What are you looking for client-wise to bring in and who you can help?
Yeah, we don't specify or specialize in any industry. We've touched them all, from a small politician running for mayor to city council to county seats to even a 2016 presidential candidate to other kinds of industries. So we don't specialize in industries, but we kind of zone in on positions in those industries, and that would be maybe the director on up to the CEO and salespeople too. Just anybody that wants to perform at a higher level where the stakes are super high, and getting it right is extremely important.
Right. What was it like early on with Ted Turner? Were you able to meet him and interact
Oh
with him
yeah,
at all? I'm curious
yeah.
about that. He's such
Well,
an enigmatic figure, at least from
yeah,
my childhood. Again, I'm 50, so Ted Turner's
yeah,
been synonymous with cable television since I was a kid.
yeah,
Did you have a chance to work with him, and what was that like? It's a kind of
yeah.
private question here.
Yeah, he was a very super driven individual, and he had a billboard company that he inherited from his father. He was involved with World Cup racing, sailboat racing, and just had his fingers in a lot of different things. But he came up with the idea of a 24-hour news channel. He heard it on the radio. He said, "Why not for TV?" One of his things was he liked to ask everybody, a taxi cab driver and employees, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" So he was very much an open person. Give me your thoughts and ideas. Then he'd take all this information and run with it. But he was not your typical perfect polished speaker by any means. He's this slow Southern drawl,
Yeah,
but he still had that magnetic ability to draw people into him because he was such a visionary. I didn't like his politics, but I admired him for his way he moved business and how he took on competition when CNN was just a year and a half old. ABC and Westinghouse were coming at them with a headline news channel, and Ted said that's not going to work. So he said, "We'll come up with CNN too," which he did. And he launched it 6 months prior to ABC and Westinghouse coming out. So he was just very on the forefront of challenges and took them on head on. So, but he was one of those guys that would walk around. I mean, at sometimes at midnight, he'd come down in his bathrobe to the CNN cafeteria and walk around, talk to people, grab a midnight snack, and then head up to his penthouse above CNN Center. So, he's a really charismatic individual and very interesting to work with because you never knew what he was going to do next. He was known as the mouth of the South, but
sure.
quite a character. And he's still
Right.
around doing well.
Did you? And so you were able to interact with him?
To a certain degree. I mean, obviously, the behind the scenes with the money and all that, and the
Hmm.
finances and direction, I would pretty much be the one in the studio if he was bringing a VIP group in of investors or just dignitaries from different countries. And if I was in there, I would explain what the teleprompter was doing and the chroma key and how that all worked and things like that. And then see him on the elevator and occasionally. So it was not like we hung out by any means. No.
But an affable guy and
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah,
didn't look down on anybody.
he had that executive presence that I'm talking
Yeah.
about, that ability to attract people magnetically, and they want to be around him. They want to work for him and do good in his eyes. So
I suppose
yeah,
that thing they call it.
the it factor, exactly.
Right? Yeah, he
Yeah,
had it.
he had
Now,
it.
there certainly is one thing that I think Ted Turner imparted on you that to me seems like a disease, And
I
that
know where you're
is
going. I know where you're going. It's all over your chest, buddy.
where am I going with that one?
Yeah,
I don't know what in the world you were thinking, but the Atlanta Braves, huh?
yeah,
After
yeah.
being a Southern California boy.
Yeah, you're right. I was raised and bred a Dodger boy, Dodger Blue, Ron Say and Steve Garvey and Tommy
Sure.
Lasorda, of course, back in those days. But moved to Atlanta in 1985, and Ted owned the Braves at that time, and they gave us 20 tickets every season to take our family and friends and things like that. So all my kids were raised Braves and are still Braves to this day. And of course, back in those days, the National League West, Atlanta was a part of that. And so our arch rival was the Dodgers
Right.
before they separated and we finally went to the National League East. But every time they come out here, we're either in San Diego or in Los Angeles watching them. Yeah, it's fun.
That back then, the thing I remember about the Atlanta Braves, because again, the only other than game of the week, you could catch Cub games when cable television came out, and of course, you'd catch the Atlanta Braves games on whatever channel, TBS, I think it was, Superstation, they called it back then.
Yeah, WTBS Channel 17, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember, boy, those are some ugly uniforms back in the day that those Braves wore. Or they like light blue back in the 70s.
But they were good.
Yeah, they were good.
And even Joe Torre was the manager there for a while. A lot of people forget that. He went to the Yankees afterwards, but he was a part of the Braves for a couple of years.
A lot of us grew up on the Braves, like I said, the Braves and the Cubs, just because of cable television.
Well, and that was a Ted Turner thing. He said he was a local UHF station there in Atlanta. And he said, if I could put this on the satellite, we could call this the Superstation. And I'm going to buy the Braves and I'm going to buy the Atlanta Hawks, which he did, basketball team. And he's got instant programming. And then the Braves blew up. Everybody's watching them, So that was a smart move. And then later he bought Warner, Hanna-Barbera Studios, and then also the MGM movie library and colorized those. Also, he could have program for his cable outlets, so he could, promote and market them.
Way ahead of his time, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was fun to be around that environment.
One more question. Your favorite Brave player of all time?
Of all time?
Yeah.
All time. Well, Chipper Jones comes to mind immediately.
Sure.
He, third baseman and played with them forever. And he's such a Braves Hall of Famer. And John Smoltz. I mean, on and on. There's a lot of great favorite players, but probably Chipper Jones. Dale Murphy is another one. And yours?
I have a quick Dale Murphy story. He went to school back here. I live in Portland, Oregon. And he went to school back here. When I was a little kid, about 4 years old, he would stand at the end of a football field underneath the goalposts, and he would throw a ball in the air, and he would hit the ball through the goalposts on the other end. He'd throw a baseball in the air, and he'd hit the baseball through the goalposts on the other end of the field. So a 100-yard shot through the goalposts, and he would do it one after another, after another, after another. And I was 4 or 5 years old. I thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah. And the tail end of the story right about now, they're trying to see if he can be put on the ballot for the Hall of Fame. So we'll see where that goes.
I think he's a two-time MVP.
Oh, yeah, 2 or 3 times. Sure.
Yeah, he was quite a bit. Steve, this is the hours fly by whenever I do these things, and this one is just the same. What do you want to leave our listeners with? How to get a hold of you? We kind of talked about what you're doing in the business, but kind of, take a minute or two and tell us what you'd like everybody to remember.
Okay, sure. Thank you. I think a lot of people ask me who was my favorite interview when I was at CNN, and I had the opportunity to interview a lot of people, but I think probably the top one was Zig Ziglar, that motivational sales expert that I talked to you about. Just a great guy, very positive. I got to sit down with him for a full hour at CNN Center. And I used about a 10-second soundbite from him for a program I was doing at the time called Seeds of Success. So this is 1992. And I put away the tapes And just about 2 or 3 years ago, I pulled them out of my garage, listened to them again, watched them, and realized that this was a gem that I had to share with the world. So I sent a copy over to the Ziegler family in Texas, and then I put it on YouTube. And our audience can find that if they go to my YouTube channel. So when you go to YouTube, search Steve Kosch, K-C-H, and you might want to put in the wit and wisdom of Zig Ziglar. And one of the favorite quotes that I had from that time was, he said, failure is not an event. No, I'm sorry, I'm misquoting. He said, failure is an event. It's not a person. Yesterday ended last night. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. So a lot of good wisdom there. And then if people want to get a hold of me, Steve Kosch at gmail.com, we'll get through, or mediatrainingnetwork.com.
Steve, it's been an absolute pleasure. Like I said at the beginning, I love these conversations. I get to talk to all sorts of people. I get to learn all sorts of new stuff, and you fit right in with that. So I appreciate it very much, and thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it, Jerry, and go Braves.
Well, all right. Yeah. Thanks, dude. Go Dodgers. Here we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks, pal. I appreciate it.
You got it.
Bye-bye. All right. We are all done. Thank you, sir.
Cool. Oh, you got it. Thank you, Jerry. It was fun. Pleasure working with you.
Yeah, for sure. Learned a lot. I appreciate that. Hopefully that resonates with our audience. You know, the interesting thing, we've been having a bunch of different people on from all different walks of life, and the thing that we're hearing back the most, which is really interesting, is that things that I wouldn't think people would find interesting except in a niche, the people outside of that niche find it very interesting.
Interesting.
So, with truck drivers commenting to us about, about finances and exit strategies for businesses and all of that different things. So people seem to like hearing about things that they otherwise would have no connection to. Right. And so that's kind of the neat thing about these podcasts is it just seems to be a little bit for everybody.
Well, good for you. You're making it work very well, very successfully. Congratulations.
I appreciate it.
If you're ever in Southern California, look me up. I'll buy you a drink
at a Dodger game.
If the Braves are there. You bet.
Thanks, my friend.
You got it. Thank you, Jerry.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Billy, that was fun. What'd you think about that guy? Steve Kosch.
That was awesome. Really interesting guy. I always love talking to people who's been in an industry for so long. They always have that insider knowledge. And yeah, just awesome guy. He's really got that executive presence that he was kind of talking about. You can see it when he's talking and just the way he talks. Yeah. You can really hear it and feel it.
Yeah, you have. What I thought about him as we were talking is where I'm always saying you have to take advice and get instruction from people who have been there and done that, right? And we know what, all of these online training programs by, 28-year-old morons that have never done anything. But when you get somebody like this who's been there and who has done that, and then he comes across so well, and you're like, oh yeah, I need to listen to that guy. He knows what he's talking about. I appreciate that much more than somebody reciting something they read in a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny, the portion of the podcast where he talked about him leaning forward and leaning into it and like being engaged in the conversation, I completely picked up on that, but like almost subconsciously.
Yeah.
Like I noticed he was doing it, but I never like put actual thought to it until he said that. And then I was like, I've been watching him do that the whole time. And like that completely makes sense.
I think there's that body, reading that body motion and the way that you hold yourself and how into the conversation you are is as simple as whether you're sitting back or sitting forward and leaning in to hear what somebody has to say. Now, that was cool. All right, everybody, that wraps up this episode. Hope you liked it. Thank you for tuning in. Check us out. You guys know where: YouTube, Instagram, Instagram at both Jerry Brazy and Jerry Brazy Podcast, Facebook, iTunes, Google, Reddit, Spotify, Jerry Brazy on all of them. Spotify's got just Jerry Brazy, right? No Jerry Brazy Podcast.
Spotify?
Yeah.
Spotify's Jerry Brazy Podcast.
And no Jerry Brazy.
Correct.
I can't keep that. Send us your questions to questions@jerrybrazy.com. Remember, people, Opportunities are everywhere. And before I say that again, hey, go hit the like button. Go down there and subscribe to our Instagram. Go over to the old YouTubes and hit the subscribe. That little bell will come up. You guys know what to do.
And share this episode with somebody you think needs to hear it.
Most importantly, please, if you would not mind sharing the episode and helping us get the word out. We will appreciate it. Remember, everybody, opportunities are everywhere. Like me asking you guys to help a brother out. Go get them. Peace.
Peace.